Okay. Welcome everybody to this month's LinkedIn Live. Today I'll be joined by Karen Bright and Joe Edge, and we'll be talking about how to elevate your LinkedIn strategy. We're going to reveal some of the best practices that we picked up at a recent conference called UpLift Live, which was hosted in Birmingham. So before we delve into the details, I just wanted to introduce Social Elements and us to you. Social Elements is a social media marketing agency. We work with life science and healthcare businesses, but we also work with other B2B businesses as well. And we help them to be heard online. We hope to blend an insider's knowledge of the sector with a strategic and analytical approach to social media marketing. So we use our experience and knowledge in the life science field, and we fuse this with our skills, expertise, and up-to-date resources within social media marketing, both organic and paid. This is what makes us unique. It's unusual to have scientists and marketeers all wrapped up into one little package. We're results driven, but we also focus on working with you and your team to maximise your marketing budget whilst delivering an authentic and strategic campaign. Our values are that we're knowledgeable, curiosity provoking and strategic. We like to look for ways to do things that challenge and exceed expectations, and we're curiosity provoking. We're also observant, data driven and results orientated, but we're definitely not boring. So I founded the agency, that's me, I'm Lisa, in 2017. And as I mentioned, we focus on bespoke strategic social media support for businesses. We do support all types of business, but as I've mentioned, we have a special interest with startup biotechs and not-for-profit organisations. This is me. I have 8 years of experience in organic social media and paid for social advertising across LinkedIn, Facebook and Instagram, although LinkedIn is my favourite. I also have a master's in medical microbiology and a love of all things scientific. I've got 20 years of postgrad experience in research and drug development. You can find me on LinkedIn using this QR code. And then next up we have Jo. She specialises in organic digital marketing as well, with a focus on strategy, social media content and training. And again, LinkedIn is her favourite platform. She's got a wealth of experience covering other social media platforms as well. And she's worked in a variety of businesses, including life science, tech, education, charity, SaaS and recruitment. And then Karen, she's an award-winning copywriter and she's also a social media specialist. She's got over 20 years of experience in marketing and comms, and she's won several national and regional awards. She specialises in copywriting, blog and feature writing, web content, social media marketing and email marketing. So just before we move on to the content, I wanted to let you know about some of the services that Social Elements offers our clients. We break them down into 3 areas. First up is strategic development. So we work with clients to help them develop a marketing or social media strategy for their business. We also then offer ongoing services, so we can become the voice of the business and provide organic social media and paid social advertising support services. We also offer things like content marketing, blog writing, case studies and newsletters. And then thirdly, we provide training and consultancy support for our clients as well. And this is for where businesses want to upskill themselves in this area, or they just want a bit of support and hand-holding along the way. So today's agenda then. So we're going to be covering quite a bit of information that we picked up from UpLift Live. It was a full day's conference, so obviously we're having to condense a lot of the knowledge that we've picked up, but hopefully this will be useful for you. We'll be delving into some information presented from John Esperian about post and comment anatomy. Then we'll move on to some tips we picked up from Michelle Raymond about how to manage LinkedIn company pages effectively. I think that's probably going to be a hot topic for a lot of you, because I've heard lots of complaints lately about getting traction on company pages. And then Niraj's fascinating chat about how to use LinkedIn as a sales tool, which again, I think is probably really timely for a lot of people. We'll pass on some ideas from Juma Bannister about using a video effectively. And then we'll also discuss LinkedIn advertising with tips presented from AJ Wilcox. And then Ivana will finish up the presentation with some tips from Ivana on employee advocacy tactics. So I'll just hand over now to Karen, who's going to talk through John's part of UpLift Live. Thanks, Karen.
Hello there. Yes, so for those who don't know John Aspirian is one of the co-organisers of UpLift Live, the LinkedIn Focus Conference, but he's also a copywriter, so and a very good one as well. So it was no surprise that John's presentation talked a lot about language used in posts and hooks and that kind of thing. And John made the point in his opening words that most content on LinkedIn actually performs rather badly. And obviously what you want is for your content to get noticed and to be memorable. And there's lots of tactics that you can use, obviously, to achieve that. The hook is really one of the most important. And John talked about making sure that the first 100 characters or the first 3 lines are really well crafted. I mean, that's the most important part of any post. And if you can't get people reading the first 3 lines, then you've lost their interest completely and they've scrolled on to the next post. So certainly the hook is the most important. And John talked about how surprise and intrigue and also anger are quite important. And he made the point that you shouldn't sort of be focusing on rage in your content, but certainly trying to dial into those sort of emotions and try to get an emotional response from your reader to get them to read on, because essentially anybody posting on LinkedIn, that's their main job, is to get people to read past that first sentence or first couple of sentences. And then the next point that John made was really about language that you use. And this isn't just applicable to LinkedIn, it's applicable to any kind of marketing that you're doing. So making sure that you're using everyday concrete words for better recall and not using abstract terms that will sort of alienate your readers. So John used the example of political speeches and political messaging, and he talked a lot about how the really clear everyday political the words used in political speeches really sort of garner the most interest and engagement. And John also talked about commenting, so not just on what you write and what you post, but obviously the other side of the equation is very much using comments. And we've sort of heard a lot about this, not just from John, but from other experts, like namely Richard van der Blom and a few other leading voices on LinkedIn, talking about commenting being a really underrated activity on LinkedIn. So it's not just about that one-way conversation, it's getting engaged in conversations, which after all is what LinkedIn's all about. So one of the best tactics you can use is actually, obviously you're going to be engaging with the people in your network, but actually where you'll sort of deliver the most value is in commenting thoughtfully on posts outside your network. So not being really random or using a scattergun approach, but identifying people who you have common interests with, who work in the same sort of field, the same sector, and making those sort of comments, reflective comments, not just sort of great post type comments, but really well thought through, well argued comments, asking questions. And so, you know, you will find, and a lot of the research has shown recently, that will actually have quite a big impact on your engagement and your visibility on the platform. John also talked about video posts. So there's been a bit of a change on LinkedIn in the past few months where the first, it's really just the first line of your caption that will be shown in video posts, which mean that it's no point sort of spending hours and hours carefully crafting very long descriptions for videos, because unless somebody actually clicks more, they're not going to see the rest of that message. And then another tip that John shared, which I thought was really interesting, was around links and posts. And obviously this is quite a hot topic. Anyone who works on LinkedIn will know this is quite a hot topic on LinkedIn, whether you should include external links in your posts. And John shared a tip that I'd not sort of come across before, which was LinkedIn link handcuffing, which is where you'd have a URL that you want to include in a post, and instead of just including it as the URL, you'd put sort of like square brackets around the dots in the URL, so that it would appear as plain text, and your reader would then have to copy that into a browser and then make some amendments to take the brackets out. But the idea of that is then you're not getting penalized for including an external link in your copy. I suppose my one concern with this approach is that it's, you know, adding an extra barrier in the way for your reader, so they're actually having to go and do something to the URL. They can't just click straight through. But it is one technique you can use to avoid the external link penalty, which research shows is clearly there on LinkedIn. And there's a couple of examples here. I mentioned earlier about using emotions, tapping into emotions in your hooks, in your opening hooks for posts. And there's a really good one here from our founder, Lisa. And this is a lovely post, and it's all about multiple sclerosis awareness. And Lisa's mum very sadly suffered from multiple sclerosis, but Lisa shares a very personal story. Now, she could have opened this post in a very different way. She could have opened it with some stats about multiple sclerosis, but actually the post has a lot more power, and it really is quite moving to read, because Lisa has used you know, her story, a personal story, to introduce a topic. And then next to that, we've got a poll. And so this is a good example of using a poll, but in a thoughtful way. And actually, you know, there's a lot of new research showing that polls are struggling on LinkedIn. So if you're going to use a poll, it's really important to make sure it's well considered. Another example here on the left, this is from 3 Biotech, who are a client of Social Elements. And that shows the importance of focusing on a single topic. This is something that John also talked about in his presentation, making sure that you're not introducing loads and loads of topics in your posts, but clearly focusing on one theme. And this is a good example of that. And then also an example from a client of mine, not a Social Elements client, but a client of mine, which is from LSE's marketing. And this is a good example of visual storytelling and sort of building a story, building interest, using graphics appropriately, and telling that story.
Okay, thanks, Karen. Handing over now to Joe, who's going to talk about company pages.
Thank you, Lisa. Company pages is something that I get really excited about. I know that might sound quite sad, because I think company pages are often seen as the kind of like maybe unfashionable friend on LinkedIn. People don't seem to like them that much and spend a lot more time on their personal profiles and thinking about sort of branding and how they grow that. But actually, company pages could be your secret weapon for your business. And actually, there's a lot that you can be doing to make sort of really positive traction and input to get your company page working really well with your own personal branding too. And Michelle came along. She's on a global tour at the moment. Sort of every time I log on to LinkedIn, she seems to be in a different country right now doing a different talk, but she shared some really great kind of gems and insights, because she's been working with lots of B2B businesses on company pages for many years. And you may have seen her on LinkedIn. She might be sort of known also as the Tim Tam lady. She's always kind of giving her little lots of posts about Tim Tams, and I know at UpLift Live she was giving lots of Tim Tams away, so quite, you know, something that sticks in most people's minds about Michelle if you don't know her already. But one of the things that she started off with, so talking about, was the embracing really the power of two. And what that really means is thinking about how sort of businesses can do something differently with their sort of company pages, so different from their competitors, and sort of build that into their branding and their strategy alongside their personal sort of branding. So looking at sort of, you know, how you and your employees can build your sort of strong brand, but ultimately they can always walk away and leave the company, and then you've kind of lost that. And that's something that happened. Michelle gave an example of that's what actually happened to her sort of company, where she had really sort of, they were doing brilliantly on LinkedIn. She built up a really strong personal sort of brand, and actually when she left the company, that went with her. So that's a real risk to businesses. So it's really important to think about how that sort of employee sort of branding and your own personal brand really sort of works well with your company page. And you've got to really sort of think about how you can create a strong brand and do things a bit differently to help grow your reach, your page followers, and sort of really boost engagement on your company page. Some good examples, actually, one to sort of have a look at is nothing to do with life sciences at all, but I think they do things really well. UpLift, if you have a look at them, quite often how they sort of tie their sort of employee content in with their company page content works really nicely. And they're a really good example of how having a sort of strategy to make it sort of really sort of compelling and engaging, that people sort of really want to get involved in. And if people sort of move on from the company, you know, they've still got that really strong brand and that company page working really well for them. The second point that she looked at was about engaging actively as your company page. So this is something that so many businesses fail to do. So you can't just set up a page, post content and expect it to sort of work really well for you. And if you want to sort of get great organic results, you can actually be sort of doing a bit more from a company page perspective to be engaging as your company page. So thinking about how you use sort of commenting and sort of boosting your sort of visibility on industry posts, looking at sort of maybe other businesses or partners that you collaborate with, and employees, you know, supporting them. So to help sort of boost your page visibility, you know, supporting your employees and sort of helping sort of build relationships. And I'll show you a little bit about that in a moment, about how you can switch in between your profile and your company page. The next point was about shifting from lead generation to demand generation. And this is something that I think a lot of businesses really overlook. And it's about sort of how you can create sort of value for your audience. So creating sort of content that's going to be sort of helpful to them and that they're going to sort of resonate with, and that's going to help your audience, so the right people sort of achieve their goals. So thinking about more engaging content that you're sharing. So thinking maybe sort of like useful data, research, insights, and maybe sort of authentic stories about your company too. So it could be about clients, you know, wins and successes that you've had with them. It could be about your team, or stories about your business that make the whole sort of content that you're sharing sort of more interesting, more relatable, and more likely for people to sort of remember and want to engage with. Over on the next page is something that Michelle was just launching at UpLift Live, actually. It's about this time. So this is the first time that she was kind of like talking about this, her sort of adopting the page advocacy framework. And this is like 4 steps that I think for any business, no matter sort of what size, are really important steps to think about. So the first one is play. And all that means is engaging actively. So really thinking about how you can be more active as your sort of company page, and obviously your sort of profile too. The second is amplifying. So thinking about how you can support others. So it's not just all about you posting and hoping that people are going to sort of comment and support you. You've actually got to be a bit more kind of thoughtful and strategic about how you're supporting others. So again, sort of going back to that commenting on employee content, or maybe thinking about partners, collaborators that you can you know, comment on their content and be supportive and add interesting and sort of thoughtful comments too as well. The third is about giving. So remembering that it's like a two-way thing. It isn't just about, you know, one-way traffic where you're posting and just hoping that something lands and that people you know, are interested in kind of getting involved. It's got to be a two-way thing, that you need to be sort of giving as well as hoping that you're going to sort of receive engagement back as well. And the fourth is about establishing, so creating a really sort of strong brand for your company and sort of building a community of the right people, whether they're sort of collaborators, partners, potential clients, you know, and advocates for your business. That's really important, having that sort of meaningful community that you're building as well. So on to the next page, please. So here we're sort of just going back to, I hope you can see this. So this is an example of the social elements page, and also Lisa, where you can kind of flick through. If you're commenting, there's a little tab that you'll see sort of on the left hand at the bottom, just under the image, sort of where you would normally comment, that you can change in between. So you can go from being, if you're an admin of a company page, you can also then click on that little arrow that you can see, so it's circled in that red there, and you can change that to your profile. So you can click between or flick between the two of them. So you can comment obviously from your personal profile, but you can also comment as the company page too. And the other example is showing sort of Lisa how she's sort of sharing her, you know, the monthly roundup on her personal page. So sort of really sort of championing and sort of backing that company page content to sort of get it out a little bit further and reach her own sort of followers there as well. So that's something that, you know, regular sort of practice, a good thing to sort of build into your planning. So the top tips are really, this is sort of going sort of on sort of back over some of the things that we've talked about before. So top tips, your company page. So making sure that you are not thinking of it as a personal brand or a company page. It's got to be both. So thinking that sort of going back to the sort of the two together, making sure that your company page and your personal sort of branding, that strategy is all feeding in as one, and you've got a really cohesive strategy that looks at all the elements that you need to bring in that to make sure you're making the best and sort of optimal impact that you can make on LinkedIn, because it should be like a team effort rather than sort of one or the other. It's got to be in unison. The second, that active participation, that engagement part is really, really important. Now, you know, if you're a larger company, you've got lots of employees, there'll be some people that just don't ever want to sort of engage and get involved in LinkedIn, and that is absolutely fine. But it's kind of like, you know, tapping into, you know, the people that do. You will have supporters and employees that do really sort of like getting involved and are more active on LinkedIn, and sort of how can you sort of utilize that and tap in to that sort of potential to help sort of get your page kind of growing and out there and more visible. So think about how you can do that as well. That sort of participation is really important. The third, the value-driven content, really, really crucial. So you want to be sort of sharing content that is going to be, you know, helpful to people. The last thing you want to be doing is sending out sort of really salesy, spammy content that isn't really useful and just looks like one-way traffic. It's got to be something that people are going to find useful. So those kind of like, you know, data-driven insights, you know, real sort of human stories that people are going to be interested in and be able to relate to and find value with. Going back to the sort of page framework, that, you know, really simple but 4-step kind of framework that you can use to really sort of help make sure that you're amplifying sort of other people's voices, that you're giving real value, and you're really setting the scene to clearly set your brand identity and build from the foundations up. And the fifth is something that I think people often overlook, especially from a company page, is to just think about that sort of daily habit of engaging with posts, so that you're cultivating a community. And you might have noticed actually on your own sort of personal profiles now that you where you comment on other people's posts, that you actually can see the impressions you make on that. And actually that's a really great habit to get into, because it really can help sort of boost your visibility. If you're being like really strategic about how you're commenting on content on LinkedIn, so if you're looking for sort of, you know, industry partners or potential sort of clients that might be customers that might be interested in your business, you know, leaving really sort of meaningful, helpful comments that kind of showcase your knowledge and your expertise are really, really important. So it's always going in with sort of the mind of sort of adding value and being helpful rather than salesy. So always kind of avoid that and think about how you can kind of add value where you're leaving comments. And we've got two sort of like examples just to show you very briefly of companies that are really sort of quite playful kind of with their content and are having fun to sort of stand out as being different. So one is this company here, which is Plasmidosaurus. They're a biotech research company, and lots of their content is about sort of dinosaurs and DNA, quite fun, quite playful, and gets lots of engagement because it's interesting, a bit different. People sort of want to comment and get involved in. And if I can go on to the next slide, another great example, which is not anything to do with life sciences at all. So if we can go on to the next slide, is Duolingo, which is a really great example, again, of a company page just doing things a bit differently. So it's just really fun, really refreshing, honest, really sort of, you know, finding ways to sort of get the teams involved. And you can just see, you can't actually see the post, unfortunately, there, but you can see the sort of first line where it says some teams treat competitors like a threat. Our design team prefers to build community. And that is really what they're all about. So it's really sort of moving away from that kind of sales driven content and all about sort of having fun, bringing things to life and making it interesting so people want to get involved.
Thanks, Jo. So moving on to using LinkedIn as a sales tool with tips from Niraj Kapoor. So this is a really hot topic at the moment. Lots of people I speak to want to know how to, you know, generate more sales, generate more leads using LinkedIn. So I think this was really timely presentation. And the first take home from Niraj was that persistence is key, but we must remember to be creative. So he emphasized that you should follow up multiple times with prospects or leads. You know, everybody's really busy and it's easy for messages to fall through the cracks. But it's important to try to personalize your approach and use methods like sharing useful articles or commenting on posts thoughtfully. And one thing I particularly liked the sound of was sending voice notes or videos, which I thought was quite a nice personal touch. He also said to avoid generic follow-ups, like things like, did you get my message? I'm just following up. All the things that, you know, we all hate to receive. And then the second thing was that he said to leverage your own storytelling for engagement. So that's your organic posting. So try to share personal, relatable stories on LinkedIn to try to build trust and emotional connections with people. Although, you know, it can be difficult to share personal content and not everybody is comfortable with that, it is worth remembering that these stories are about 5 times more memorable to your audience than just cold, hard facts and stats. Next slide, please. Thanks. He also reminded us to try to ask insightful questions. So try to develop meaningful industry-specific questions for client meetings and avoid those really corny, cheesy things like what keeps you up at night. And then he also reminded us to use our LinkedIn DMs more effectively. And that's something that I forget to use. They're useful for building a rapport with people. You don't necessarily have to, you know, go straight in for the sort of sale with people, but it's nice to have a conversation. And you can also ask what sort of help they might need and try to see challenges as your opportunities to grow as well. Next slide, please. So in summary, some of his top tips are, firstly, to persist creatively. Secondly, to prepare insightful questions. 3, use DMs to engage thoughtfully. And 4, to adapt and stay flexible and responsive to challenging business environments. And remember that to follow up multiple times. I think he presented a stat that says something like small to medium businesses should be followed up with at least 4 to 6 times, which was surprising for me. Okay, so handing over now to Jo, who's going to be talking about video.
Yeah, this was, I thought, a great talk as well, because it was quite interactive, which obviously video is. And I think it's still an area that lots of people really sort of shy away from. But video, isn't going away anytime soon. It's a really important medium to be using in terms of your content. And it's a really sort of underused medium for many businesses at the moment, because people don't necessarily, lots of people aren't confident getting on camera and on screen. So it's actually giving you a real advantage if you can get your business and team taking advantage of some of the opportunities that sort of video bring. So Juma specializes in video, and he shared some really sort of interesting tips from his sort of learnings over the years with what kind of is working and what isn't. And one of the things that he first kind of talked through was about sort of choosing, engaging video format. So lots of the types of videos that you'll see on LinkedIn, especially, most of them are like talking head videos, which are great. And, they've definitely got their purpose. It's something that I use quite often, because it's a really easy way to kind of get your messaging out to your audience. And it's quite a simple way that most people can just record on their phone and share. But actually sort of looking at how you can experiment with different formats is actually a way to sort of really help you to stand out from the majority of videos that you'll see on your LinkedIn feed. So thinking about different things that you can do and experimenting, testing them out. So trying things like maybe one that I used really a couple of months ago, that actually was my best performing video, I would say, this year, was a time-lapse video where I wasn't even talking in the video. I had some text coming up, but it was showing a scene of something sort of obviously speeded up, and that did really, really well, and got probably about 10 times more views than I would normally get. So it was just doing something a bit different. I haven't seen very many of those on LinkedIn, so something you could use. Or things like vlogs, a day in the life, looking at sort of like interviews and maybe sort of taking snippets of interviews you've done, or perhaps like LinkedIn lives, that type of thing. Those kind of reaction videos as well can work really well. The other thing is about sort of focusing on like video structure. This is a really important point, because this is where you can go really wrong and completely waste the opportunity and your sort of time creating a video that no one's going to sort of watch. Because if you don't make it really compelling in that first couple of seconds to grab people's attention with a really clear hook, then it's likely they've scrolled on past and haven't ever got to midway part through your video, let alone the end. So it's really important to start with a really strong beginning, so that people know what they're kind of getting into and what they're investing their time in, and then to make sure there's a really sort of clear setup, so that the expectation is very clear to them about what your video is going to be about. So making sure, again, sort of always keeping in mind that the content is valuable and it's going to be useful to the people that you're trying to reach. So offering something that's going to be sort of helpful to them, and making sure at the end that there is a really strong call to action, so that you're driving the engagement you want. So depending on what that could be, it could be as simple as just let me know in the comments and starting a conversation, but it could be signing up to a webinar, heading to your website, giving some ideas or feedback about things. So just making sure that's really sort of clear at the end, because again, it's a wasted opportunity if you don't include that. Lots of businesses, and this is for most businesses, and especially sort of in the life science sort of industry as well, this is a great kind of like aspect to sort of think about how you can use sort of longer form video for building trust. So they don't have to be those sort of 30-60 second kind of like quick short form videos that give some useful kind of takeaways. You can really think about how you can sort of make deeper sort of relationships with your like intended audience. So using things like, again, sort of going back to maybe like a panel kind of discussion that you've had, or perhaps like an interview or a LinkedIn live, and taking sort of maybe snippets of that, but having a sort of longer form video, so that people might want to save and sort of watch back later. But it really sort of helps, they want to invest their time in sort of watching your video, and it helps to sort of form deeper relationships and connections with your sort of intended audience. The next step is, having a plan. And again, this is really, really important. So some people do have like a natural talent where they can literally kind of whip their phone out, start recording and, do an amazing video without really sort of having to think about it. But I would imagine most of those people have really sort of, crafted and sort of like practice over, time, that it becomes much more sort of natural to them. Most of us really need to think very carefully about how we record that. And if you're a business, it's really important that there is a clear goal and a clear purpose to what your video is all about. What you don't want to do is go completely off track and lose the essence of what you were trying, the messaging you were trying to get across in the first place. So making sure that before you start filming, you've got a really clear plan about sort of what that ultimate goal is, and the start, middle and end, so that you're really sort of making the most of the opportunity. Something that Juma sort of highlighted, which I would wholeheartedly sort of agree with, is avoiding clickbait tactics. It's very, it's tiring, it's annoying. It's, you see lots of this on sort of LinkedIn as well, where there's some kind of really kind of like shocking kind of opener and hook at the beginning that makes you kind of want to keep watching, but actually halfway through or towards the end you feel like perhaps just kind of wasting your time a little bit. You really want to be giving value to your audience. That's really important. Otherwise people are just not going to watch your videos. So make sure that you always think about how you can share something that is going to be helpful, it's authentic, and it's going to add value. Thinking about the sort of formats of video, this is really important too. So it's diversifying that, so it's not always the same. If it's always the same, people start getting used to it, and again may overlook it on their feed. So think about how you can kind of change things up a little bit. So you can do like a talking head video, but next time you might maybe have something else, like a day in the life sort of video, or time lapse, like I've sort of mentioned earlier on, but something to kind of change the format, so it's not always the same. And that's the same as when you're filming like perhaps a talking head one. It's good to kind of like maybe sometimes shoot in different sort of parts, so that you're beginning, middle and end coming from slightly different angles, or using the sort of focus, so sort of moving the camera sort of nearer and further away, so that it just creates a bit more interest for the viewer, because otherwise again they sort of start overlooking things if you don't keep kind of adding something that is going to keep them watching and engaged. So think about how you can do that and make it more interesting as well. The hook and setup, we kind of talked a little bit about that before. So it's really important making sure that you've got great lighting, that you've got a clear, well, depending on where you're filming, clear background. You might have a branded background if that's kind of in line with your sort of branding and company sort of strategy. But just make sure that you're really thinking about sort of where you're filming, how it kind of looks, and that's the hook, so that you're really sort of making sure you're making a good like impact right from the start, so to get people's interest and keep them watching. And then thinking about longer videos, so how can you prioritize longer videos? And this is something you can obviously, for many B2B companies, you could be repurposing on other channels as well. So you might be using, able to use on other channels like YouTube, for instance, or perhaps on your website as well. But thinking about how those longer videos that add real value, so perhaps where it's like a webinar or it's some kind of like training, that type of thing, can really sort of help to build deeper like trust and connections with your audience. Pre-production planning, so going back again to that, we sort of talked about having a structure and goals before you start, to make sure that it's really clear and really focused, and it's at the end of the day not like wasting anyone's time, because we're all very time short. People have very short attention spans these days, and they don't want to feel like they're being kind of like missold to, or they've ended up getting to the end or midway through your video and it's actually not anything useful to them. So it's really important to make sure that it's structured really well, and that it's very clear and easy for them to sort of follow the flow through and get value from. And then looking again to that authenticity, that's really key, and that goes through every sort of part of content that you share on LinkedIn. Thinking about being authentic is really like key, and kind of avoiding that sort of sales kind of over self promotion, and just being sort of relatable, more human, giving genuine value and focusing on quality and not clickbait. We've got a few examples here, but I just wanted to show you one of Juma's so you can see what I mean. It's this is like an interesting one where he is showing how when you've created a video, so you're filming, how you can make sure that you can edit it to make it shorter and that it's not too long. And the best, his top tip really for doing that. So a quick fix for shortening your video. So if we could just watch this one, it's like about...
So you just finished recording a 1 minute video. First of all, congratulations on all your hard work. Unfortunately, a 1 minute video is 1 minute and 38 seconds. And you want to cut that video down to the shortest time possible. How do you do it? Well, it should be really very easy if you had planned for it before, because your video is supposed to have 1 point. And if your video has 1 point, all you need to do is go into the video and cut out everything that does not support that 1 point. And that's the way I edit sometimes, brutally. If something does not support the point I'm trying to make, even though it sounds nice, I go into the video and I chop that thing out. And not only does it reduce the run time of the video, it makes your video clearer so that your message gets to the people faster. So try to keep your video to 1 point and your content will be more precise, more impactful, and you'll have less editing to do overall.
Thanks, Joe. That was cut off quite quickly. Right, so moving on to tips from AJ Wilcox about LinkedIn advertising. So AJ shared some really useful tips, and the first one was to leverage thought leader ads to improve engagement. So this is something we've had lots of success with and we've seen to be really useful. So this is basically where you promote an individual's post rather than a company post through the campaign manager platform. This can result in 5 to 10 times higher engagement than company posts. And we've also seen most recently that click-through rates are also improved. So in a recent example, we shared an individual's post and we received a click-through rate of about 10%. And when you compare that with the benchmark, which is about 0.5%, you can really see how these ads are doing really, really well. There's two types of formats that you can use for thought leader ads, and that's single image or video ads. The video ads seem to be particularly effective for building trust and also for using as retargeting as well. A second tip from AJ was to optimize targeting and bidding. So the best thing I think about LinkedIn ads is the targeting facets. It's the only social media platform where you can professionally target your audience, which is ideal for B2B. You can target using things like job title, company lists, skills, all sorts of things. So AJ also emphasized that as well. And then something else to remember is to switch to manual cost per click bidding to avoid overspends. And the strategy that we employ, and AJ does as well, is that we start with low bids and adjust upwards accordingly. And then the third tip was to build a 3-stage funnel using thought leader ads to engage cold audiences at the top of funnel with things like talking head videos. And then to retarget them middle of funnel with educational resources before presenting a demo or conversation ad at the bottom of the funnel to convert. The fourth tip was to avoid costly defaults. So LinkedIn are really good at having certain boxes checked, which aren't necessarily great for your ad campaigns. So remember to disable things called audience expansion and LinkedIn audience network as well. They just tend to muddy the waters and not spend very well. Also make sure you switch from maximum delivery to manual bidding. That enhances your ad quality and also reduces your costs. And a fifth tip from AJ was to test lead forms strategically. Something I like to do is compare the LinkedIn, so the in LinkedIn lead generation forms with external landing pages. What I found is that LinkedIn forms tend to get higher conversion rates, but they aren't generally as good quality as directing traffic to a landing page. So key takeaways then from AJ. So number one, focus on individual promotion with thought leader ads. 2 was to utilize precise targeting to reach the right audience for you. 3, develop a strategic sales funnel in order to guide cold audiences towards becoming warm leads. Number 4, be mindful of the defaults that we've just gone through, check and adjust the campaign settings. Number 5 is use lead forms wisely and measure their effectiveness. And then number 6, AJ kindly provided a checklist for getting started with the LinkedIn ads, which is really useful. So what we'll do is we'll drop a link to that in the notes when we publish this presentation. And then just some examples here of 2 campaigns that we've run previously that have done really well. And these are both examples of thought leader ads. So the top one is a single image thought leader ad. And this is the one that enjoyed click-through rates of more than 10%. And then the bottom one is a video ad of an interview. And again, this enjoyed really high engagement rates and really high click-through rates. And something else I should also mention is that we are noticing that the cost of these engagements is reduced as well. So not only are they performing better, but they're performing more cheaply as well. So that's it for me. I'll hand over to Karen now to finish up. This is just a reminder before I hand to Karen that if you have any questions, to drop them in the comments and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. Thanks, Karen.
Yeah, so I'm just going to take you through a few of the key points that Ivana covered in her presentation. Ivana's an employee advocacy specialist. She's had great success with employee advocacy campaigns she's run for clients. And just to recap, for anybody that doesn't know a lot about employee advocacy on LinkedIn, it's all about tapping into personal networks to sort of amplify brand messages and amplify the power of your company's brand. And that's not just about sharing company content via your personal profiles. It's much more powerful than that. It's sort of almost turning your employees into brand ambassadors, getting them to engage, encouraging them to engage in relevant discussions in different groups, in general discussions, adding comments, and sort of really getting them to be cheerleaders for your business, I suppose. And Ivana made a very important point at the start of her presentation that 80% of all employee advocacy projects fail. And she said the reason for this, there's about 5 key reasons, but essentially these are based around 2 major topics. One is that there's no structure to the employee advocacy programs that companies often launch. And the other is that there's no employee engagement behind it, and also no proper communication or training behind those activities. And so she shared a number of tips to really create a successful employee advocacy program. And she said to start with that you should start small and be very focused. So don't use a scattergun approach. Be very careful and mindful about who you choose to be your sort of brand ambassadors, and start small. So don't make it really ambitious at the beginning. Choose people who you think will be proactive and be good supporters of your brand, and then test different strategies and see what works well on a small level before you sort of start to scale that up. And she also recommended that you make sure that your employees are sending out consistent messages in their profiles. You don't want every person who's sort of championing you to have a different message about your brand. Just send out mixed messages about your business. So a little bit of training, helping employees to optimize their profiles effectively. And of course, that's a service that Social Elements offers very successfully to clients. But also she did mention, which I thought was quite amusing, she did mention not overloading profiles with keywords, or indeed making them so good or sort of keyword optimized that all your employees leave because they've been headhunted. Next slide, please. And she said it's very important that your employee advocacy activities are underpinned by a really good internal comms program. So your ambassadors need to understand their role and what they're being asked to do. So make sure that you're giving them specific tasks and sort of if you want to drive traffic to your company page from these people that you've nominated, to make sure that they include the link where they can, but obviously not in a very sales way, but to make sure subtly they're sort of driving traffic to your company page. And she said, don't be afraid to use incentives to encourage employee engagement and employee advocacy. So, for instance, you might want to say, well, the most successful person who's done the most with employee advocacy this month, we're going to make a donation to a charity of their choice at the end of the month. That's one tactic that I've heard many companies use very successfully. And then providing guidelines and trainings to your employees. So making sure they understand their responsibilities in sort of being your brand ambassadors, and making sure that you give them clear instructions on posting and interacting with competitors and handling confidential information. And of course, this ties in very nicely with Social Elements, because we do quite a lot of training with organizations and sort of working with their employees side by side to train them up, help them optimize their profiles, help them understand how to post, when to post, what to post. So yeah, just carrying on with that message. So maybe selecting a small group of members of your team to sort of launch and pilot advocacy initiatives, and to see what works, because at the end of the day, this is all about testing and refining your strategies. And then sort of making sure that you're crafting profiles that promote the company, but that you don't see a large exit of your employees because they've been headhunted at the end of the day. And then making sure that your employees understand the social policies of your company, so they're not going off freestyling and doing their own thing that might go against your corporate sort of messages. Training is obviously an essential part of that, and as I mentioned already, Social Elements does a lot of training with many different types of life sciences firms and others for that matter, to help brand ambassadors understand their role. And also to providing ongoing support, because at the end of the day, it's not just about that initial activity, but it's making sure that employees feel empowered to support your company, and that they understand what's expected of them, and that if they struggle with writing, that you're giving them assistance with techniques and how to write better. And also an induction for new starters. Social Elements does quite a lot of work on this front, working with companies who've got new intakes coming in, and working with those new starters to sort of get them up and running.
Great, thank you very much, Karen and Joe. We'll just take a couple of minutes to answer any questions that have come in, and then we'll wrap up. So one of the questions we had is, do we think link handcuffing is better than posting a link in the comments? Good question. I'm not sure I have any data on this myself, but I feel like if you're going to do one or the other, that posting a link in the comments is better, mainly because I think it's less hassle for the viewer. Have you you two got any thoughts, Karen and Joe?
I think sometimes posting in the comments, it depends really sort of like how active, like say if it's on a page, how active people are engaging with your page, because actually it can then get lost in the comments and makes it quite difficult again for people to find. So I think if it's a really important link that you want to share, I think it's absolutely fine to share it on the actual post, because then it's just easy for people to click through and get where you want them to go. And it might have a slight impact on your reach, but as long as you're not sharing maybe a link in every single post, I think when you sort of weigh things up, it probably it's not going to make a huge amount of difference. I know that certainly some of the company pages I've worked on, I don't think it does make a noticeable difference that you think, right, I'm never going to sort of share a link again. It depends how important it is, really.
Sometimes you have to, don't you? I think it's
yeah.
What do you think, Karen? Do you have any?
Yeah, I think you have to. It's just one of those necessary evils, really, at times. And in fact, John in his presentation talked a lot about the fact he includes a lot of links in posts, and he's done some research on this, and they don't perform as well, but nonetheless you have to do it sometimes. My worry about handcuffing is that you're adding that extra barrier in, and is anybody actually going to copy that and then take the brackets out or whatever? It's just making the reader's job a little bit more difficult, adding an extra step in. Although I've heard a rumour, and I don't know if you two know any more about this, that Richard van der Blom's latest research has said there could be a penalty for adding links and comments, that some of the research is showing that LinkedIn, the algorithm, is starting to penalise.
Yeah, I've heard that as well, actually, and that's why I think it's probably better just to stick it at the end of the main body of posts.
Yeah, I think that's what I do generally as well.
Yeah, we're running out of time rapidly, but we've got time for one more question. There's how often does the LinkedIn algorithm change, and what's the best way to keep on top of changes? I actually I don't know about you two, but I don't know how often it changes, but I keep on top of it by going to things like UpLift Live, and I read Richard van der Blom's report every year, which is such an excellent resource of LinkedIn information. But just quickly, do you two know how often it changes?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's changing probably all the time. And there's not one algorithm. There's lots of different algorithms. So I think when people are posting about one algorithm, that isn't really right. And I think it's always about testing sort of what works for you, and what works for one person might not necessarily work for another. So it's about sort of testing things out. I wouldn't actually sort of worry or listen to kind of what people are saying the algorithm is doing, because it might not work for you, your business and your audience. So concentrate on that. You're going to have find much more value, I think, sort of focusing on that rather than worrying about what the algorithm is doing.
I think that's good. Sorry, Karen.
I think that's absolutely right, and what you and Joe have both said, in that focus on the themes that have come out that we've discussed today, that the likes of John and Ivana and Juma have kind of talked about. Focus on the authenticity and the quality and the value that you're delivering, and keep mindful of the algorithmic changes. I mean, as Lisa said, Richard van der Blom's report is absolutely brilliant, but as Richard says himself, don't get hooked up on it. Don't worry about it too much. Just take away the key points.
Okay, great. And we'll have to leave it there, but what we can do is answer any questions either on LinkedIn or with the recording on the website, so people's questions will be answered. So feel free to still drop questions in, and we'll answer them afterwards. So that's it. We're down to the last minute. Thank you for everyone joining today. Hope you found it useful. Next month's presentation will be from Phil Blackmore of Create Health. That's going to be a really excellent, interesting discussion. So stay tuned for more information about that. And you can contact us, reach out to us on all of these different ways. Look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.